As practitioners, we know that in the world of land stewardship, collaboration with our peers who work in other divisions is absolutely critical to our success. And related to the issue of deer, there's none more important than working with our colleagues in wildlife conservation. We are honored to have an accomplished group of practitioners from the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, Division of Wildlife Resources, joining us today. This experienced group will share information about a new deer control pilot being launched in the state that features a collaboration between Virginia's wildlife and heritage staff, with support from additional private partners. One other thing that makes this collaboration so unique is the background of the Wildlife Division Director, Michael Lipford. Michael Lipford retired from the Nature Conservancy in 2023, having served as Director Ecologist of the Virginia Natural Heritage Program, as well as the Virginia State Director for 25 years, and the Southeastern U.S. Regional Director. Currently, he is the Wildlife Division Director for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. He's also a former board member of the Natural Areas Association. Joining Michael today are a few of his colleagues. I'd like to introduce them now. Max Goldman is the statewide access coordinator for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. And prior to joining DWR, his 15 years of work as a wildlife biologist for the National Audubon Society, the University of Cape Town, the University of Wyoming, and the National Park Service took him from Alaska to the Cape of Good Hope, and from wildfires in the desert Southwest to an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Joining Max is Justin Folks. Justin is the deer project leader for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Justin worked as a private lands biologist in Virginia for 9 years, providing technical assistance to landowners for the native habitat establishment and management. And then was district biologist with DWR for 2 years before assuming his current role. David Henneman is the recruit, retain, and reactivate coordinator for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. And before coming to DWR, he previously served a variety of law enforcement positions, most recently as a special agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and kick the presentation to Michael.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to do some setup. Next slide, Justin, on our collaboration between the two agencies that Lisa just described. A little bit about the agencies. We are the Department of Wildlife Resources. We conserve and manage wildlife populations and habitat across the state. We connect people to the outdoors through all kinds of activities, and particularly today, we're going to be talking about hunting. And we also protect people and property by promoting safe outdoor experiences. Next slide. We have a lot of experience managing deer herds. We have 96 owned properties. We're the largest state land owner in Virginia outside of VDOT, and ours are more interesting. And our lands total about 270,000 acres. Next slide. A little bit about the Virginia Natural Heritage Program. I do have a background here, but the program was especially founded in 1989 in state government. It existed a little bit before that, but really a focus, as you all know, on habitats of rare, threatened, and endangered species, significant natural communities, and other features. Next. Next slide. Yeah, so there are 66 natural area preserves across the state. Many of these are state-owned. Some of them are owned by other partners with deeds of dedication that act like conservation easements. And some have public access and others do not. So the setup here is that last year, our colleagues at the Natural Heritage Program in their leadership approached our leadership and said, we'd like to to work with you on getting sharpshooter strategies in place for uh, our uh, our natural area preserves to reduce deer herd populations. And we talked about it in our staff and basically came back and said, why don't we try a an approach that actually includes hunting instead of just a sharpshooter strategy? So we did this because it was a DWR strength, Department of Wildlife Resources strength. We are a sister agency to DCR, and if we could do this in a cost-effective way for them, and it could provide a good marketing story to the public in reducing deer herds. The strategies that we're going to be talking about today with my colleagues are doe reduction with a sharp shooting like tool that would reduce doe herds significantly, maintenance of population reduction strategies over time, and managing deer in a landscape context. And I'll turn it over to Justin.
So hello everyone, I'm Justin, and I'm going to try to walk you through the general concept of this whole project and kind of how it relates to deer management as a whole in Virginia. Sorry. So here on this, these maps shows the relative deer abundance in the state on both private and public lands. So the colors here correspond to the relative abundance of deer at the county level. So the darker the shading, so red would be the highest deer abundance, goes to orange, then to a moderate level of yellow, and then low abundance of green. You can see there's a big disparity here between deer populations on private land and those on public land. Majority of that public land in the western part of the state is our national forest lands. So very not productive deer habitat there and very low deer abundance. But with our private lands, we've got a lot more deer. And as we'll show later on, you know, these natural area preserves are kind of tucked in amongst a large matrix of various private land uses. So how do we manage deer abundance in Virginia? We utilize regulated fair chase hunting. And in Virginia, unlike other states that may use tag allotments to help adjust deer harvest numbers and whatnot, we actually manipulate doe hunting opportunity in Virginia. So the number of days in which a hunter can harvest antlerless deer or female deer. Now, obviously, deer populations are not going to be they're not going to be they're not going to be consistent across the county. They're not going to be the same density across the county, not going to be uniform. That was the word I was looking for, is uniform. So in Virginia, we've got additional programs to help increase antlerless harvest at the property level. One of those programs we're actually implementing here during this project with the natural heritage folks. And why do we focus on female deer? Obviously, it's because of the reproductive potential. So to help illustrate that, we've got this lovely little doe that survived its first year of life and has now reached sexual maturity. And now oftentimes a doe, its first attempt at motherhood is going to have a single fawn. But we all of us know that typically a doe is going to have twins later on in life. So its second experience with motherhood, we've now got a set of twins in addition to that fawn from its first time being a mother. Again, most commonly going to have twins. So the next year, going to have another set of twins contributing to that population. But as a doe gets older, and if nutritional quality allows, and that doe's in a really good nutritional status, it's not uncommon for a doe to have triplets. So now we've got even more deer on the landscape. And then the following year, again, if the nutrition is adequate enough, she can have another set of triplets to add there. So we've gone from one doe to then contributing about 11 individuals to that population just in a short period of time. Now, while this is all hypothetical, and we're assuming here that there's no mortality of any of those fawns and whatnot, a real world example is this comes from the Georgia Reserve deer herd, which was an experiment done in Michigan in the 1920s. Kind of a foundational project that gave us a lot of information on white-tailed deer population dynamics and so forth. They originally stocked that enclosure with 6 deer in 1928, 4 does and 2 bucks, and then that population grew to over 200 individuals in just 7 years. So these deer can really pump out a lot of little ones in a relatively short period of time. Looking further at our private lands here in Virginia, this map here shows all the ones that are highlighted in red are the counties with private land deer populations above current objectives. So a significant number of counties, I think about half of the counties in Virginia, we now have populations on private lands that are above objective. And again, these natural area preserves tend to be tucked in amongst those private lands as well. So we're really trying to address, trying to address these population problems in a lot of counties across the state. And that, that is met with numerous challenges. And among those are declining hunter numbers. Last year's hunting license sales were about half of what they were at our peak in 1987. We've got increasing hunter selectivity. So the hunters that we do have are selecting bucks over does, and a lot of times older bucks over younger bucks. Access to private lands is becoming more and more of an issue as land ownership is changing hands, and there's a lot more folks out there maybe reluctant to allow access to hunting. And then numerous sources of refugia for deer. So not only some of those private lands that are off limits to hunting, but we've got the urban environment that kind of shelters deer as well. And then again, these natural area preserves can also serve as a form of refugia. To try to demonstrate, what we're dealing with here on some of these areas in the state, probably similar situations elsewhere across the country. We kind of wanted to demonstrate a hypothetical scenario, but with some real world refugia. So some of the folks from Natural Heritage that are on now might recognize this property. This is the Calbane Natural Area Preserve in Augusta County, which is close to my hometown. Fairly familiar with this area. But looking at the property level, just the property itself, you can see there's a mixture of open lands and forested lands. A lot of native vegetation here that's actively managed via prescribed burning and other practices. So a really diverse, context here, a lot of good habitat for deer. There's a lot of good forage, a lot of good cover here. So everything a deer could imagine it would ever want to have is located on this property. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, looking at the local scale, so not just the property itself, but the properties around it, we've got some residential development close by. There's agricultural fields nearby. There's other, forested lands and stuff around there too. So still a lot of good habitat surrounding this property, but can also serve as areas that are experiencing additional conflict, possibly due to increased deer abundance within the natural area preserve itself. We zoom on out a little bit further at the landscape scale, a lot more agriculture there. There's more urban development and urban sprawl and that sort of thing. So, the more urban development that we experience, displacing deer, these agricultural fields are obviously good sources of forage for deer as well. But when those crops are harvested, those deer are then displaced, and all these factors contribute to even more pressure put on the natural area preserve itself. And again, I mentioned conflict before, deer conflict with agricultural producers, residential properties, and then you can see some roadways and stuff there as well. So deer vehicle collisions are also a concern. So when we started brainstorming, how we might help the natural heritage folks with the deer management issue, I kind of brainstormed things and had this idea in my mind. I could visualize kind of what was possibly going on and try to maybe how to solve it. But it was hard to kind of put into words. So hopefully I can help illustrate, what the situation might be and kind of what we're after here to help manage these deer. So we've got the property here that's serving as a refuge. We've got a lot of deer stacked in there within the property boundaries, but there's also deer, in the properties around there as well. But the first thing that usually happens, when night falls, a lot of these deer that are, hanging out in the preserve during the daytime, when night falls, these deer are venturing out into the residential areas, causing damage to residential plants. They're causing damage to adjacent farmlands and stuff as well. And in Virginia, if a farmer is experiencing agricultural damage to their crops, they are eligible for a crop depredation permit or a kill permit. And so oftentimes, you know, those farmers they're under a kill permit, they're able to take deer at night. So once the shooting starts occurring at night and deer are being removed, these deer are pretty smart. And once the shooting starts, a lot of them will just venture right back into the preserve. And so while the farmer is trying to mitigate crop damage itself or themselves, it's really not as big of an impact as they might think that they're having when these deer venture back into the preserve and find sanctuary there. Now, if we look at, so hunting season's in, we've got deer, you know, in surrounding areas, but also within the property. But when hunting starts outside of the property and deer are being removed, again, those deer wisen up and a lot of them, you know, venture back into the preserve again. And in this scenario, we've actually got more deer in the preserve than there were before hunting season even started. So this is kind of the bread and butter of what we're after here, what we're trying to do. So now in this scenario, hunting pressure is more evenly distributed across the landscape. And this is the general plan of what we're trying to conduct here. So initially we want to do, you know, initial removal of a lot of deer at once. Internally, we refer to this as Operation Doe Down. So trying to knock out as many deer as we can within the property initially. And that's going to start influencing some deer behavior once they realize that they're no longer safe within the preserve. So deer now starting to venture outward, and then they're open to hunting from hunters outside of the preserve now. And then with continued hunting within the preserve, kind of a maintenance style hunt we'll get into a little bit later on, you know, additional deer being able to be taken within the preserve, but then hunting is going to continue outside the preserve as well. So we're continuing to remove deer off the landscape, but additionally, you know, the deer are going to venture outside of the preserve and be susceptible to predation outside where they weren't before. So again, deer moving outward and being taken, but also deer that used to find refuge within the preserve are now susceptible to being taken via hunting. So now we've got much fewer deer across the landscape, and you know, fewer conflicts with adjacent landowners, but also decreased conflict and issues with deer overabundance within the preserve. So overall, the deer management methodology here, initial removal of as many deer as possible. This is a short-term benefit, obviously. And then we're going to focus on female harvest to decrease the reproductive potential for deer within and around the area, which is a long-term gain. And then we want to apply hunting pressure to influence deer behavior, which is going to be effective in the short and long term. So in addition to being harvested on the property, deer are going to move off property and be more susceptible to deer harvest elsewhere. And then those deer that found refuge on the property are now going to be exposed to the threat of predation. And we hope that this project will help address deer management objectives for DWR, but also the natural heritage areas as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to David, who is going to tell you a little bit more about the boots on the ground that will hopefully help us meet these.
So when we first started discussing this, we were looking for a hunting method that would somewhat replace sharpshooting, where the carcasses would be utilized instead of potentially wasted, and we could bring some of the outreach and retention recruitment goals into the program as well. So Special Ops Excursion is an organization that provides hunting opportunities for special operators nationwide, whether it's a gator hunt in Florida, a moose hunt in Maine, or a brown bear hunt in Alaska. They're all over the United States, and they provide opportunities to special operators to hunt, so active duty special operators. They also provide a lot of opportunities for their families, whether it's a retreat or, you know, whatnot. I spent 22 and a half years in the service. A lot of it was guard, but some of it was also in special operations. I know firsthand how valuable these opportunities could be. So we were looking to bring them in as a partner because they can put individuals on the landscape quickly that are adept at taking animals, understand farm safety, and that it meets some of our objectives as well. Next slide. So this is just some of the range of hunts that their participants have been on, whether it's depredation and heavy removal hunts at night within local regulations, or just a regular old hunt where they're harvesting antlerless deer as well as antlered deer for management purposes, or that's a family hunt on the left where our father and son got to go out and hunt together. So that was the first prong that we talked about in a three-pronged approach, was putting experienced people on the landscape quickly. Next slide. So for our more maintenance type of hunts, we have multiple programs within DWR, the Department of Wildlife Resources, that are educational programs specifically. So we have our hunter education program, and then we have a mentorship program. So through our hunter education program, they offer workshops where it's hands-on education for new hunters that might not have ever hunted anything before, or it might be for experienced hunters that just have not been successful, or they want to get advice from experts as far as how to elevate their game and gain new skills. So a lot of these programs, after the educational portion, there's a hands-on workshop that's on site usually, and then after that workshop, there is a hunt with someone involved in the program. So whether it's an instructor or some of the visiting instructors with that program, they take them out and they hunt afterwards. Next slide. And then our mentorship program is statewide, and we have individuals that are seeking a hunting mentor, and then we pair them up with an experienced hunter, and those experienced hunters are vetted through our program. They're background checked. We interview them to make sure that they're actually what they present themselves to be and that their intentions are pure, all that. So they're paired with an inexperienced hunter, and then they're able to hunt on different properties that we have available. So we were using the special ops excursions hunts initially to lower deer numbers right off of the bat, and then our hunters education workshops and the mentorship programs to continue putting hunter pressure on the landscape throughout the rest of the season. So we wanted this whole thing to be equitable. Both of our hunter education programs and the workshops, as well as the mentorship program, are open to the public. So as long as you can pass a background check, you can participate in the mentorship program. Our hunters education program, it's the exact same thing. You volunteer. If you're an experienced hunter and you decide that you want to try to have an opportunity to hunt one of these properties, you can volunteer as an education instructor, and there's ways for you to do that. But also, if you're a new hunter and you don't have any experience, there's an avenue for you to participate as well. So they're not exclusive at all. They're inclusive, and anyone from the public can participate, but it is a process. And I'm going to turn it over to Max.
Great. Thank you, David and Justin and Michael. I'm going to kind of run through this and sum it all up, and hopefully we'll have the answers to some questions as well. So as David mentioned, this is a two-pronged strategy. The first prong is that population reduction. And the initial goal was to do this, initially have a sharpshooter analog on the properties in order to remove animals. Unfortunately, the Department of Defense rarely consults with us when they decide on deployment schedules. And so we had to pivot some of those hunts to be within that elongated hunt season. And so what we're doing now is applying those mentored hunts and hunters education hunts throughout that elongated season. I'll talk a little bit more about why it's elongated in a moment. And then when the deployment schedule is allowed, we get those special ops excursions hunters onto those properties. And so we're pretty excited about that and hopeful that that's gonna bear some fruit. And the reasons that reduction, as Justin showed, reduction is a component of the program, but that reductions can vary annually. That changes with food supplies. For instance, this year in Virginia, there's a strong acorn seed production. It's a mass year. And what that'll do is disperse those animals throughout that landscape in a more homogeneous way. which makes it more difficult to harvest, especially on these large landscapes. Like we're talking about, some of the properties are in the 3,000+ acre range, possibly even more than that. So we're talking about large landscapes that are plenty of places for deer to hide, and often with neighbors that are agricultural as well, or rural in other ways, and undeveloped. That behavior change aspect, as David mentioned, that consistent hunting pressure, as Justin showed, will distribute those animals a little bit more evenly throughout that landscape and give some of these other programs that we have a chance to work, along with the private lands programs that allow agricultural neighbors, as well as in some cases suburban neighbors, to harvest animals in larger numbers than a regular tag might allow, or outside of that regular season. We also have a program that allows for that on public lands. And that program is what we're going to be employing here. And what we've done is extended the rifle season from the beginning of September to the end of March. So we're able to apply hunting pressure for 6 months out of the year. And the goal for most of these properties was to get around 10 hunts on each property. And I say the goal that depends on availability. It depends on the depth of the problem on each property. No, the deer management issue on each property isn't the same. So we worked closely with those regional supervisors within the Department of Conservation and Recreation's Natural Heritage Program to ensure that we've come up with the right answer, that we can avoid their management actions on those properties, and that we can get as many hunt opportunities on those properties as we feel like is necessary in order to make a meaningful impact on the deer population. So by applying hunting pressure within those NAPs, we can eliminate that sort of refuge quality that those NAPs have, or we can at least reduce the value of that as a refuge to the deer herd in the area, which can improve the efficacy of management efforts on the adjacent properties through those other programs. And hopefully we can make an impact, as you saw in Justin's visuals, which nice work, by the way, Justin. I like that a lot. You've got a future in animation, I think. We can support some reduction at that sort of landscape scale, which is really where we're working. And because of the importance of that landscape scale, we can't do this just on public lands. And this has to be a sort of a community effort. Next slide, we'll move on to talking about some scalability. So the impacts of these, by going through looking at this problem as something that we're going to do over the long term, we have to ensure that it's effective over the long term. In order to do that, DCR has employed a person by the name of Mary Jane Epps, who's going to be monitoring the vegetation within those properties. I'm using the Sentinel method that Dr. Blasi developed a couple decades ago and has refined over the years. By looking at those numbers, we'll have an idea of how effective the program has been so far. We'll also look at the harvest numbers from within that property and within the broader area to get an idea of how much of an impact we're having on the herd itself. And then we can adjust our goals based on what we see. The expectation is that we'll see improvements to recruitment in those vegetation communities and recovery, and some resiliency restored in some of those habitats, and that we'll see a reduction in the deer population, but also an improvement to herd health overall. And that's also an ultimate goal. By controlling the herd size, we can also improve the herd itself, of course. A big part of this also from the community impact perspective is harvesting these animals. And sharpshooting can often end up with a carrion dump, or in a number of different ways you can end up with that venison being removed from the landscape in a short term, but not much community benefit in the long term. We're working with an organization called Hunters for the Hungry to ensure that the venison that's harvested it helps to address some food insecurity issues within the local areas. They donate that venison to local food banks, so we can have hopefully a meaningful impact on the community and to fill a need there as well. Next slide. As was mentioned before, this is scalable. We have a really robust community of volunteers and hunters education coordinators within the agency, and they're excited. They're distributed really well across the Commonwealth, as are the natural area preserves. We also have really good relationships with NGOs and other special interest groups. Veterans groups and active duty military groups are great. They can be mission oriented, which this is a mission that can keep the folks from that selectivity that Justin mentioned, harvesting specifically bucks. That's also true of our mentored and hunters education programs, because they're stewarded through that experience with folks who are also within the DWR family and share the same goals as we have. Then that focus on antlerless animal removal is a really something that can be at the forefront, something that we can really rely on. And then having that mentored hunting program where we've got, I think what we're hoping to see is that there'll be some real growth to that program as folks who live in those areas find that they are open to hunting. Now, you can't show up on the day of to hunt with us, but like David said, if you're an experienced hunter, joining that volunteer program, the Hunters Education Coordinator or Hunters Education Volunteer Program, or the Mentored Hunting Program is open to you. And if you're a novice hunter, then joining those on the other side of that learning is available as well. So we're hoping to grow those programs throughout this, which serves a goal of DWRs while we're helping with that habitat resilience within the natural area preserves. So by having this well-distributed group of volunteers, as well as really robust relationships with special interest groups, we can address these deer management issues on more properties than we're looking at now. For this pilot year, we have 8 properties within the Virginia's Natural Area Preserve network. They're well distributed throughout the Commonwealth. The DWR separates Virginia into 4 regions for administrative purposes, and we have at least 1 property represented in all 4 of those regions right off the bat, which is great. 8 is a pretty big pilot year, but we're making it work with a lot of working together. Next slide, please, Justin. An important piece of this and a real immediate goal, it was to communicate this to the general public. I'm personally always looking for, and DWR is always looking for, ways to connect hunting to conservation. We are first and foremost the state wildlife agency, but we also provide the opportunity for folks to get their hunting and fishing licenses, boat registrations, etc. So working with public access and ensuring outdoor recreation is something that's really important to us. Making that connection between our goals of habitat management and wildlife sustainability and that outdoor recreation piece of hunting as a conservation tool is super important for us. And so framing this activity as a conservation tool in the same vein as applying fire to a landscape to mimic a natural fire regime in places where anthropogenic impact has made that, I guess, not impossible, but not wanted, at least generally. So we use fire, we use moist soil management techniques. We'll manage for invasive species or other invasions from pests. Those are all things that we use to manage lands to ensure habitat health and species resilience. And hunting is another tool that we can use. And so framing that publicly, hunting as a conservation tool and hunters as conservationists is something that we see as really valuable towards the long-term goals of our agency, but also of this program, of course. There's also some neighbors of all these properties, and some of those neighbors are agricultural and they're struggling with deer management issues of their own. Lots of them are enrolled in the programs that we already have and that we've described. Others are suburban or that suburban sprawl. You have suburban communities that are popping up who have a hard time keeping hostas in their yard or don't have a vegetable garden and haven't for a long time. So initially communicating this program to the broader neighborhood is going to be important and has been important, because it at least lets them know if they're hearing gunfire, first off, that it's outside of what they expect the deer season to be, or on properties where there hasn't traditionally been hunting, they know why. It also we have some constituents, of course, who have sometimes misguided views of what hunting is. Dr. Blasi alluded to some of this as well, and we have some kind of some Bambi's mom outrage from time to time when we talk about deer hunting. When we have the ability to get ahead of that and communicate about the importance of the properties we're protecting and improving the resiliency of, as well as the personal property impacts, as we heard about the impacts to if through auto collision, as well as crop depredation and wild area impacts. That all of that stuff, by getting ahead of that with communication, we can sort of frame this issue in a way that can maybe usurp some of those initial concerns. And also, as we mentioned, some of those neighbors have been itching to hunt these properties for a long time. They recognize that they're full of deer. They see the numbers of deer that are in them, or the numbers of deer that are moving through them, and they're smart enough to understand that there probably a lot of opportunity to hunt on those properties. And so by giving them those opportunities, and as David said, these programs are technically open to the public. They, again, can't show up day of, but there's a lot of opportunity for them to hunt as well. So we have those communications goals in front of us. And another important piece is this is a really compelling story, probably more compelling, I think, than sharpshooting is. Sharpshooting costs money. There's pretty good evidence that there's limited efficacy on large landscapes, especially at a per deer cost. We are state agencies, and so the money we spend, it really doesn't matter where it comes from. People are aware of it, but also, we're now working with active duty and veterans military groups to manage deer at a landscape level and ensure that these incredibly important areas are preserved while addressing food insecurity issues within a community. I mean, that's a good story. So we're going to tell it, and we have been. And we've been working together, both agencies together, put together a communications plan and identified some content pieces that we'll be putting out, and a long-term strategy for communication at many levels, at a sort of statewide and even national level, as well as at a level that's more appropriate for neighborhoods, so they know what we're doing. Next slide, please. Yeah, another important piece of this is the collaboration aspect, and that's a really great goal. By helping the Department of Conservation and Recreation's Natural Heritage Program fulfill their goals of protecting the rare and sensitive and important habitats and communities and species within their properties, we're also helping with DWR's goal of public engagement and hunter development. And we have that common goal as the wildlife agency, as DWR is the wildlife agency, and the important mandate of DCR that we've already mentioned. That ultimate goal of sustainable wildlife populations is shared and really important. It's also, it sounds easy enough. Just make sustainable wildlife populations. I'm sure it'll be fine. But we've got a big job ahead of us, and I think we're on our way to at least making a market impact on it. Next slide. So hopefully we're gonna work to restore those plant communities and ensure some habitat resilience. And we've got an excellent story to tell, and by strengthening those hunter and conservationist connections through the Hunter's Ed and mentored hunting programs, we've got a long-term way of ensuring that we have hunters that can help us to solve these problems and to help us with these goals. We can scale this across the Commonwealth, and it gives us an incredible opportunity for a really meaningful collaboration. At the core, this program is about partnership between agencies and hunters and the landscapes we care about. And by managing these deer populations thoughtfully, we're not just restoring balance in plant communities, but we're also helping the natural area preserves recover their ecological resilience. We're building a bridge between hunters and conservation, and giving people within both of our shared constituencies tangible hands-on roles in stewardship through these programs, like the mentored hunting and hunter education program. And these are the kinds of experiences that turn participants into long-term advocates for wildlife and habitat management. And finally, what we've built is scalable. The same approach that we're putting to work on these natural area preserves can serve as a model for other lands across the Commonwealth, showing that when we manage and access and align around shared conservation goals, everyone benefits. And I'd like to just briefly thank our partners at the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation and the dozens of staff and volunteers that are integral to the success of the program. We literally would not be able to do it without you. And we're excited to report to you guys some great results over the next few years as we move forward with this long-term deer management program within the Commonwealth. Thank you all very much.
And thank you all very much. We've got just a couple minutes left before we head into the panel discussion. I'll try to get a question or two in. And I'm not sure, this might be a question for Justin, I'm sorry, David. Are both the special ops excursion hunts and the hunter education mentored hunt opportunities focused on antlerless deer?
Yes. So the special ops hunts that are happening during the season where it's legal to harvest antler deer with firearms, they can essentially harvest unlimited antlerless deer, but they can harvest antler deer as well. But then we have hunts that are going to happen after the season under our population control program that are specifically antlerless. Our hunter ed programs and workshops and the mentor programs are focusing on antlerless deer as well. And I saw the question about pushback. With our mentored hunts and our workshops, typically those are very inexperienced hunters, and they're just happy to have the opportunity to harvest any deer. So antlerless, telling them that to focus on antlerless deer is not an issue there. Special ops hunts, those guys understand what they're there for. Ironically enough, a lot of them are involved in Hunters from the Hungry from their own communities, so they understand the benefit to the larger landscape as well. Taking the deer off, antlerless deer specifically off for that, and the benefit to local areas.
Great. I guess the second part of that question then too is, do you get pushback on the focus on antlerless deer?
No, we haven't so far.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to jump down to this other question, and there are several here, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind maybe taking some time at some point to try to answer those. This next question, what type of night hunting tools does Virginia allow with depredation permits, thermal ? Night vision ? Lights ? And on average, how many deer are taken on depredation permits? What's the average duration of a depredation permit? Several questions there in one, and we're happy to kick some of those till later. Anybody want to hit that or
take that one? So, excuse me, so our crop depredation permits that we issue, all of the above. So there's really no regulation on what can be used and when and how. I tell people, people can use a hammer to a howitzer, and you can use lights, you can use night vision, you can use thermal. All that stuff is okay to use. As far as the number of deer that are taken, it's really highly variable. A lot of people just get these permits and may only take one, maybe even 0 deer. They just like having the permit option to them or available to them. There's some properties that, depending on the size of the properties and stuff, they might take, 100 or 200. It just kind of depends. And quite honestly, our reporting rates the past handful of years has not been the best. So here recently, we've only been able to kind of go by how many permits we've been issued or that we are issuing, and the number of permits we're issuing has kind of been stable the past few years as well. So while we don't know exact numbers of how many deer are being taken anymore, I can tell you that from when we did have better reporting rates, the numbers were all over the place. It just kind of depends on the property.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much for that. And again, there are several questions that remain, but it is now time for our panel discussion. Ryan, I'll invite you to take it from here.
Great. And I just want to start out by thanking all of our presenters again for the gift of their time and for sharing their decades of experience and expertise with us as you all have. So my first question, open to anybody, everybody on the panel, is conservation is a diverse community of professionals and amateurs. It includes a range of groups from hunters and anglers to botanists, birders, and a variety of stewardship professionals. This panel really captures some of that diversity very well. So the question is, as different groups come together on deer management, as we're doing here now, what would be most helpful for non-hunting stakeholders to understand about the conservation perspective of hunters?
That's a really good question. I think having the common interest there, that, the ecological integrity, and trying to balance that stuff is important. So meeting on common ground, I think, is the important first step there. And then helping to promote, that the hunters are conservationists. A lot of times we're the ones, I say we since I'm a hunter. Hunters are the ones that helping to fund conservation, but they're the ones that are the boots on the ground, actually contributing to removing deer off the landscape, to helping feed the hungry. And a lot of our hunters are also, donating the hunters for the hungry, and donating to other people as well that are in need. So, Max had touched on the food insecurity part of it. So I think that's another important, aspect to find common ground on as well. And there's a number of resources out there that I think can also help promote hunting as a conservation tool. For those that aren't aware, the Southeastern Deer Partnership put together, it's called Wild Tail. It's a documentary that highlights hunting and hunters' role in conservation and their contribution to economies, to conservation as a whole. So that's worth checking out as well. So I would encourage, hunters and non-hunters, to watch that documentary and have some good information to share amongst one another as we move forward on this. Michael, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, let me just add something, Justin. Ryan, I think it's a great question, and it's one that we need to come up with answers to in a more sufficient way. But, I don't really think that hunters compartmentalize their outdoor experiences just to appreciation of searching for and taking animals. Our surveys that we use here in the agency really show that our hunters are out there doing bird watching, wildlife viewing, a number of things that we have in common with other constituents of outdoor work. And our outreach division, which Max and David work in, is really all about trying to create that message and create that story, to not just focus on hunting, but to bring everyone together in a way that outdoors can be appreciated however you do it, and that we're all on the same team. So I think we need to do a lot more of that. It's a good question.
Thank you both. Anybody else want to add to that? Or those were great answers, guys. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, raise my hand just to
I see.
not just bulge in here. So as you can see from the wall behind me, I'm a hunter as well, but I need to dampen down on the enthusiasm that I hear about hunter being conservationists. That's a claim which is true for some of them, but maybe not for the vast majority, because hunting is a recreational thing. When we ask hunters whether they feel they're deer managers and conservationists, they don't necessarily agree on that one, right? And so I think what we need to give them is the tools whether they actually achieve conservation. And seeing a lot of deer on the landscape is not conservation, although they always like to do that, right? So I have difficulties with the hunters that I train in suburban programs and others early on when they join me, and others, to have them shoot young bucks with just spiddly little antlers, but they all eat the same, right? So you focusing on doe reduction makes demographic sense, but it doesn't focus on the overall deer reductions. All those bucks that you have in your preserve will also eat the valuable plants. So we need to be really careful of what we automatically associate, what labels we give individuals that follow their recreation, but don't necessarily have the full understanding of what it means to be a conservationist. That doesn't mean we just focus on deer and turkeys and others that are called game, a label that I don't like because it's not a game for the ones that are being shot, or what the outcome of the activities is, right? Putting food plots in the woods is not a conservation activity. It favors deer. Yet that's constantly being promoted. So be careful of what you say, because it can be critically undermined and quickly undermined in terms of the justification that we have, even though that's the credo of many agencies. I see it all the time. Hunting is conservation. Some hunting is conservation, not all of it.
I'll
Okay.
rebut that a little bit. I think you make a good point. I think there are a lot of folks that fit that mold that you talked about. But I do think we're also making some pretty good inroads as well on trying to educate hunters on their role in conservation as well, and not just being out there being, deer shooters and planting food plots and that sort of thing. I think a good example of that is what the National Deer Association has been doing over the past several years in trying to promote more native habitat management versus food plots. Food plots do have a role at times for various things, but taking less of the emphasis on food plots, but more of a holistic habitat management approach and stuff. So I do think there are a significant number of hunters out there that fit what you've described, but I do think we're making progress on trying to change that mindset as well.
I think we need to give them the data too, right? Because you are promoting an approach here now that may or may not be successful. I have my doubts, having worked on very aggressive programs.
All
More
right,
aggressive
thank you
than
very
what
much.
you
And with that, we'll
have.
go ahead and
But the
and
data
kick
will
the
show.
program to
Mary
Susan.
Jane will
Thank you,
tell you
Susan.
what you will have or not. So I'm not passing judgments right now. I just say, man, you have a big task cut out for you, because we've done this for a decade, and see whether you are successful. Hopefully you are, and all the shooters that you get from the military are good shots. I know they're good shots, but will they achieve your conservation goals? We'll see. But the data are there, and then we can tell the hunters and educate them as well. Hey, what you're doing is not sufficient. You need to do more. You need to do something different. And to focus on big antlers and big deer is misguided if you want to be a conservationist. So let's have the data in hand, and then we can change together. I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an important component of this also, is the malleability and the long-term goal. I think the expectation that we'll have great success and we'll be seeing real meaningful impacts on deer herd populations next year is not realistic. I think that's truly, it's hard to communicate how important that piece is, that all of this has to be malleable and adaptive based on what we learn, based on the lessons we learn from the actions of hunting, based on the interest we get, the number of hunters we get, the ability to remove animals from the landscape, the timing throughout that season, when the appropriate times to hunt certain properties, which won't be the same from property to property, as well as what does appropriate pressure look like from property to property is going to change. And then thinking of this as the only action that needs to happen for deer management on any property, I think is also short-sighted. I think that this as a tool towards the management of deer on the natural area preserves within Virginia, I think it has a lot of promise. I think the data will bear out the ways that we need to adjust and amend the program. But I think to your first point, Dr. Blasi, I think this is a huge communications challenge. That's a big part of what this is, and the communicating to about hunters as conservation is, in my mind, mostly communications to hunters. Mm-hmm. It's convincing hunters of what conservation means and informing them of the value of these properties and these programs. I worked for Audubon for a long time, and we would talk about waterfowl hunters and waterfowl hunting organizations like Ducks Unlimited, that we had 99% of our mission was aligned, except for a small amount of harvest. that's not really true. That's true in where the dollars are spent and the value exists, but the mindset of the people who are participating in the variety of actions that we take isn't the same. And it is important from this because the goals, especially in deer management, the goals have to be aligned because in a lot of people's minds, harvesting does is suboptimal. It's not their goal. They want something that they can hang on their wall, which I get. I hunt as well, and that's fine. That's right. But I have a lot more in my freezer and have had a lot more in my freezer than I've ever had on my wall. And I think, it's a huge communications challenge. As anyone who's, there's the standard sort of ecological communications issues that have existed around feral cats, for instance. Those, no matter how much you make the story clear that we need to do this and this is the impact, people have emotions, and breaking through that emotional barrier can be really challenging. But we're up for it. We're going to give it a shot. So I feel hopeful, I think.
Yeah, this is a great discussion around this question, but I'm not going to pass up on the opportunity to use that segue Max just gave me here. So, in this meeting and in other meetings like it, a consistent issue that comes up is that communication and education of multiple groups in the public and among stakeholders are important goals of the conservation community, right? So thinking about land managers and their interactions with different stakeholders and the general public, distilling down everything we've heard today, I would appreciate our panel's thoughts on what the most impactful talking points for the public at large are when explaining the value and importance of deer management using approaches like we've talked about today. So, you're passing somebody on the trail at a preserve, or you're having a small outreach event, distill down your most important talking points for why these types of management approaches are necessary.
So I'll take a first shot at this just from my experiences in talking with people. And of course, the audience varies. It depends on where you are and who you're talking to. But from a general homeowner perspective, and especially in Virginia, where it's really a network of rural communities in a lot of ways. A lot of the Commonwealth is rural, and folks live among deer. Making that connection about the annoyances of their lives and the things that they deal with within deer, having overabundant deer populations, the number of auto accidents that happen, but also people just aren't able to have the gardens that they want. When you get people talking on their own about the impacts that they've had, or the neighbor did this, or my son had this experience, or we used to be able to do this, but now we put up this fence around our raised beds and it still did nothing, and they still got in there. When you get them talking about that, and then you can connect that to not only the sort of conservation ethic that I think a lot of people who enjoy the outdoors, whether they recognize it as such or not, but the value of these properties that we have, and especially the great example are the natural area preserves, which are specifically organized around protecting the rarest and the most sensitive and the most important and the most imperiled habitats and species throughout the Commonwealth. That making that connection between they're struggling with their garden and we're struggling with our natural areas, and that struggle is the same. That makes it feel like we're all pulling in the same direction. So I think that connection between landscape meaning your landscaping in your backyard, and the landscape level conservation issues that we're trying to make an impact on has value, and people hear that. But it really, it's one-on-one conversations become the most valuable, which there's only 8 million people in Virginia. I'm sure we'll get there at some point, but it is a challenge. I think there's folks, we're lucky to have some really incredibly smart and incredibly gifted folks in our creative services department to address the way to make that connection through the various ways that people ingest media. But it's tough. It is a challenge. And what I think the communities that you're talking to are all different also. And so really talking with your community, knowing who you're talking to, that's going to be the most important thing. But it is tough.
I think, Ryan, to pitch in there a little bit, most people will be almost primed to support what Max just said. I see Susan is nodding as well. People have an interest to protect their environment, whether it's directly in their garden or in their neighborhood or where they go and visit. Um, they just don't know, right? So for me, when I started all of this, I'm an entomologist by training. What the hell do I do with deer management, right? So I never wanted to really study them. I wanted to have them in my freezer and then occasionally one on the wall, right? So that's okay. That was enough motivation for me. But as a scientist, I wanted to understand what the impact is. They forced themselves onto my agenda. And the more I started digging, the more I realized we don't know diddly squat about the real effect that deer have on all the components of our ecosystem. Yes, foresters have talked about lack of tree recruitment and the responsibility of deer for 100 years. Leopold has talked a little bit about it, right? He talked about the health of the land, but what is health of the land when it comes down to how do you measure that? Right? So, and the further more and more we drilled in, we uncovered, oh my God, deer at the nexus of all the conservation problems, not of all, of many conservation problems that we have. Carbon sequestration, tick and Lyme disease, all these other things. People don't know that yet. They know a little bit about forest regeneration, but maybe not. If we could tell that story, that support that already is there, if we ask them, would actually increase. And then we need to do something about it, right? Because right now there's still a lot of positive feelings about management agency that they're doing the right thing. If we follow that, people think the management agencies are still doing a good job, but they don't show it to us. So I think we need to show it to them. What you are doing here or what else is being done is not just automatically assuming recreational hunting will solve us, but what we're doing, does it actually make life conditions for the things that we care about better? We need to talk about that, right? So you are on a path of trying to do that. I'm on the path of trying to help find the metrics so we can measure what is going on, both social and ecological.
Okay. Just giving space for others to chime in if they wish, but so all of these approaches that we've talked about, as well as the communication goals, as well as monitoring goals, all of these approaches have one thing in common, and that is they're going to involve partnerships between agencies, interest groups, academia. So open question for anyone on the panel thinking about what would be beneficial to know for our audience here. So what first steps and guidance can you, as members of the panel, offer to our listeners to catalyze such partnerships? So you want to get a new partnership off the ground in support of improved deer management, monitoring the effects of that deer management, communicating about that deer management. What are some of those barriers and what are some of those things that practitioners can do to catalyze these new partnerships?
I'll chime in hopefully briefly. I'm not great at brief, but I'll give it a shot. When I was working in Alaska, we worked often with Alaska Native communities, and there's a concept that I wasn't aware of until that work called co-production of knowledge, which was invaluable to those being successful collaborations. The idea there really is to not approach a potential partner with a fully formed idea of what the goals are and how and where they fit into that, but instead to come up with that plan together, to approach with, hey, this is a very amorphous idea that we have and we think you'd be a really good partner. What is your contribution here? What is something that how do you see this fitting? Is often, as researchers, we would go into I say we as the sort of broader Western science community go into these communities and say, we need you to fill in the blanks here, to give us your input here, because we're doing the right thing. We're going to include traditional knowledge in this work. Here's our grant deadline. Here's the blanks that we want you to fill in. and then we assume sort of that there's value also to our partner. They'll tell us what's valuable to them, and that's true when it's sister agencies working together, understanding what the value was to DCR, knowing what the value is to DWR. That's where we were able to identify what this program was. It wasn't something that we'd had in the background and we were like, I can't wait to force this down their throats. It was something we came up with together. And that's why I think it has value. It's also why we are all bought into it and we're all pulling in the same direction to try to make it work. And so I think from my perspective, that sort of community building is the same as collaboration. And that's really where it starts, is having those conversations at the beginning, at the very beginning, not when you've got an idea that you see a place for someone to fit into, but to come up with where those places might be for everyone to fit in together. That's where it's valuable. It also takes a lot longer. You have to sort of throw those timelines out the window and be willing to let it kind of take the form that it's going to take. And it does, especially when people really feel like it's true collaboration and they're not just a sort of a hanger on filling a role that you need. It's something that you're doing together. There's a lot more value, I think, in that. It has a lot more staying power.
We'll pause there.
I'll just say be flexible as well. We went into this and we had kind of a certain set of ideas about how it was going to look, and it looks similar, but it's not exactly what we thought, and things change, priorities change, properties get added or subtracted, and you just have to be able to be flexible and react to that and continue pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, Ryan, I've lived in a lot of these different worlds in many respects, from pure conservationist to, and even my personal life, hunter, birder. I think what we really need to do is just talk to one another. It becomes more and more difficult as time goes on, and we're going to have to be smarter about how to do community-based conservation without real conversation. We're going to have to do it through podcasts. We're going to have to do it through more innovative approaches to reaching people. But somehow we need to bring these perspectives together, show that there is common ground, and try to move forward along the lines of your first question. That we're all in the same team. But when it comes to partnerships, I think a lot of us, especially in agencies and even in nonprofits, we live in silos, and we don't reach outside those silos enough to get other people's perspective on how our own silo can be made better by theirs. And so I think more and more we need to break down those silos and look for opportunities to find common ground, work together, and learn something. I mean, we've just in this partnership, we've learned a lot from each other about how to work on the ground and accomplish both of our goals.
I'd like to add something about the communication, and that is, in a long-term effort like you are embarking on, and some of us have been doing projects that span 25 years, that it working with different collaborators, you think you are working with the same collaborator, but there's a new mayor of the town, or there's a new person that's in charge of the grounds, or the new manager of the land, and the communication internally within those systems doesn't necessarily follow through. And so I think that coming up with ways to make sure the team that you're working within is communicating well, but also having opportunities to speak to the public is really important to bring people on and explain why this collaboration is happening. And I'm scheduled to speak at the library in a few weeks. There are just like many things that I've spoken to the garden clubs and to the just lots of people, a lot of little groups that are curious about what's going on, and you can make big inroads into people's imaginations if you are willing to go to these small venues and give talks to people and hang out and eat lunch.
Terrific. Well, we've had quite a few questions come in from the audience as well. I want to do justice to some of those if we can. Several questions here about pros and cons of PZP vaccinations of female deer. Various opinions, but if anyone on the panel wants to briefly comment on that, those pros and cons of potentially using, again, PZP vaccinations for deer as a management tool.
I'm happy to do that because we have done the science and research on that one. Don't even go there. So unless you have a captive herd, okay, and you want to go long term. So the only way that fertility reduction works in lowering the impact that deer have is over time. You have no immigration, you have mortality, whether it's slow death or hunting or car accidents or whatever else it is, to lower the population without deer coming in from the outside. I don't know, what was it, Justin or David, who talked about the George River deer herd? I don't know who that was. So explosive growth, right, will overwhelm any sterilization effort. We have done sterilization plus hunting. That doesn't even help. So you can sterilize and prevent fertility sometimes. They also grow ovarian tubes if you do surgical sterilization. We have seen that too. So they will find a way. And the ones that are sterilized surviving much longer. We have 17-year-old does that cross a major highway twice a day to go from bedding to feeding ground. They're so smart, they can't be shot. They don't need to raise kids. Those of you that have kids or want to have kids know what an investment that means in terms of your energy and other resources. The does that don't have fawns live so much longer. So, and all of those mouse are feeding at that time. So you prolong their mortality, you increase the level, or you maintain the level of browse. Sterilization is a concept that's a dream, whether it's PCB or surgical sterilization, which is what we did, if you can even get it accomplished. We had 95% of the doe herd sterilized at Cornell at very, very high expense. That didn't do diddly squat. So sorry for the long answer, but no hope for sterilization.
Okay. One other question from the audience that our panel's flagged here as interesting is basically how do we avoid pitfalls of folks purchasing up all permits for hunting for the purpose of preventing hunting? Apparently, this has been an issue in other states. David, would you like to comment?
So for this specifically, for this program, the private partner that we're working with, I mean, the special operators are actively seeking out opportunities to hunt specifically. Then our workshop participants are doing the same thing. So there are either established hunters within the community, or they are looking to get into the hunting community. And whether it's a workshop or the mentor program, it's a pretty extensive process. It's not like I saw the question and they were referring specifically to the Florida Bear Tag Lottery, where I think 160,000 anti-hunters or people who wanted to try to conserve the bears had applied for the lottery, and they're saying that they've, got 20-some% of the tags. So with us, we're just being deliberate about our participant groups for this part. If it was just a regular lottery hunt, I'm sure that some people, we have a swan tag lottery in Virginia, and several years ago, it was kind of the same thing as the Florida, what went on in Florida. People were purchasing swan tags or opportunities in hopes that they would draw a swan tag specifically, not to hunt. Short answer is that still benefits our agency because they're having to buy hunting licenses and pay for the actual lottery cost. And even our hunters that draw tags, are moderately successful with swans. But for these programs where the sole intent is to harvest a number of deer. You just have to be deliberate with your partners. This is open to the public, but it's not it's not as simple as inputting credit card information and hitting checkout. So
yeah, and with the mentored and education hunts, we let our hunting mentors hunt as well, and we know that they're not there to not harvest. That's been clear through the vetting process. But yeah, I mean, if for these hunts, it's sort of a non-factor because we would just issue more tags until, I mean, right now I think we're issuing way more tags through the program that we're using on these public lands than we'll fill, just to ensure that we have an excess of paper, not an excess of animals that have been harvested at the end of the day.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have a lot of great questions left, and we have a lot of great discussion to have, but we are at the end of our time for our panel. But it's my understanding that everybody participating in this panel is open to taking and answering questions that people watching today may still have that we didn't get a chance to get to. So I would encourage our audience to follow up with this great assemblage of experts after this symposium closes. And with that, and thank you all again, but with that, I hand it back to Lisa for some concluding remarks.
Thank you for that, Ryan. And I do want to just close today's program by thanking all of you, all of our presenters, Dr. Baron Blasi, Dr. Susan Kalis, and the amazing team from Virginia's Department of Wildlife, Michael Lipford, Justin Folks, Max Goldman, and David Henneman, and of course, our wonderful facilitator and partner, Ryan Klopf. Thank you for facilitating such a rich discussion, Ryan. The Colcom Foundation, I'd like to also thank them again for supporting this symposium. And on behalf of everyone at NAA and participating today, thank you for taking the time to share all that you are learning about these approaches to white-tailed deer control and the impact on natural areas. The discussion was tremendous. The questions that were getting asked were rich, and to just echo what Ryan said, we will hope to get more of these answered. Stay in touch with us. We'll be following up with a lot of this information. If you or your program move your deer control program forward or discover practices that you think might benefit others, do let us know. We would love to continue this conversation and circle back at some point to Virginia to talk about and learn from the experience that you're having. So NAA is happy to continue this, to advance this topic through information sharing such as today. So many thanks to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you all again at a future program, and be well. Take care.